Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of this video podcast with Lazar. And we have an exciting guest today on the podcast. He's someone that I've known in the industry for the past few months, and someone who writes and is really regarded in the industry. Nima, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Trinell. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. So let me jump straight in. Like you've had an illustrious career in the partnerships world. Um, could you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you've now come to Nvidia and what you've seen along the way?
Absolutely. So, self-servingly, I think my journey is probably a lot like many other people. Nobody went to school to get a bachelor's in how to do partnerships, right? This is a part of your career that your journey eventually took you to. So, for me in particular, it started out at a small startup in San Francisco called Joyent, where this was a platform company building basically the early days of container and container orchestration based on Open Solaris. And one of the things that we learned very quickly to selling to customers was you can't just sell them the software as is. It doesn't do everything customers want. So taking the track of a kind of a customer empathy, we quickly realized what you have to do is curate the components that they need in order to be effective. What they want to do is build apps and push them out quickly. So while we had a team that was, focused a lot on large partnerships, we didn't have a team that focused on, well, I need a database and I need monitoring, I need logging, I need these other things. So it kind of fell upon me to step into that role. And that was my first effectively inkling of how important partnerships really were to any fledgling enterprise, any startup, and even any technology company that truly wholly wants to be effectively a platform. So from Join, I went to VMware, where I got to start working on this amazing new project called Cloud Foundry. It was open source platform as a service. And one of the amazing things about it was a from scratch, fresh design, clean sheet of paper, and had some amazing engineers and product leaders working on it. My role was basically to create from nothing an entire ecosystem of companies that wanted to build on top of it. And that really gave me the exposure and the relationships to be able to effectively cultivate an ecosystem around a particular central thesis and a central product. And then from there, the career went where the career went. I got a chance to go to Google and work on enterprise Kubernetes. Then had an amazing opportunity to go to GitLab before they IPO'd and take them through the IPO process. That ended up being my second IPO. So very fortunate to have had that opportunity. And there, my role significantly expanded. Went from starting with technology integrations and partnerships, expanded to cloud, and then expanded to the entire channel organization. So at some point, I was actually running the entire partner group of 50 people, and we were responsible for the company's business. And it was a great experience. Now, with respect to marketplaces, I started the marketplace effort initially at Pivotal, where we were trying to build a marketplace so that our customers could discover, download, and automatically install these add-on modules and services they needed. We hadn't really thought about the commercial aspect yet. We weren't really ready. And when I went to Google, it was an order of magnitude improvement in terms of the processes, the tools, the technology. The whole marketplace construct was far more mature. And they had a real commercial enterprise, and they had just started pivoting towards, wait a minute, the superpower of a marketplace isn't just discovery and deployment. It's actually the commercial transaction of getting software and selling software to your end customers and being a conduit for partners as a way to sell into these accounts. And so there it was great because I not only had a product that was in Marketplace, but Marketplace was very much a central component of our go-to-market plan and thesis. And then when we went to GitLab, it was very different altogether. We were really building from scratch an entire go-to-market effort centered around Marketplace as a route to customers, and more importantly, as an efficient procurement path. So we grew that from nothing to being almost a fifth or a quarter of the company's total throughput. And that was great because what we found was a change in the overall way that customers were buying, right? So if you remember back in the old days, we thought that the natural progression of evolution of marketplaces was initially a listing service. It's for discovery. Then it became deployment, make it easier for me to install and deploy and update my software. So there's a lot of investment was made along those lines. And the third was always to kind of automate that transaction. Just like you go into Amazon, click buy, and you get what you want. We wanted software and software purchases to be that easy. And I think this is where the road forked. For simple SaaS applications and a target demographic for SMB and lower mid-market, that's perfectly fine. They're absolutely happy swiping a credit card, buying software, no harm, no foul. When it comes to enterprise, they don't like buying that way. They actually want to have the relationship. They want to be able to negotiate discounts. Everything becomes a snowflake. Everything becomes a custom deal. And so this concept of private offers really found purchase in the enterprise, whereas the original tenet might have been, hey, I think what we should do is automate everything and you just go through the portal and you never talk to a human. That's not the way the customers in the enterprise in particular wanted to buy. So you end up having this completely divergent path that included private offers, and that became the bulk of the method that you were going to get to be able to sell software to your enterprise customers. And enterprise is basically anything, Fortune 15,000, for example. It's the entire enterprise plus probably upper mid-market. So long story short, the journey with marketplaces has been really an evolution of capabilities and a willingness by ISVs to sell through this mechanism, coupled with a customers being trained and being comfortable with this as a transaction path, as a procurement path, as a discovery path. And it's been great because I think it makes the entire process a lot easier. Think about it historically. How do you buy software? You have to pick up the phone, talk to a salesperson. They will give you a quote. You go back and forth. You approve the quote. They send you something to sign. You sign it. You take it through a legal department. Maybe you send them back a PDF. Maybe you go through DocuSign. 2 weeks will go by from start to finish of this process, and that's just the paperwork. It's really painful. What if you could do the whole thing in just a few hours? What if you could, significantly increase the velocity of your business? So I'm very excited about this as a transaction path, as a commerce-enabled capability that will become the default way that every customer is going to buy software going forward. And you could almost call it, cloud-native software procurement. Aside just from the cloud-native architectures and that modality of deploying your applications and building applications for programmable infrastructure like you can with Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Oracle. Now you're doing the same thing, but from a commerce perspective. So, sorry, that was a really long-winded response, but I think hopefully I give you a little bit of color of how we ended up here.
No, this is fantastic. And, there's so many things to unpack for us in just that one answer. Let me start with your journey. Like you started as a partnership, person, eventually became a leader. Along the way, Nima, when did you really started to see the whole marketplaces ecosystem or maturing to a level where the enterprises started taking it, considering it seriously?
So I think the journey probably started in the mid 2010 to like 2015 timeframe, where discovery became something that's very important. And a lot of the larger players usually used to have a catalog, right? I think VMware had something called the TAP program, but it was really just a catalog. It didn't have anything else beside it. It was, however, a center of gravity where we could use that as a mechanism for discovery and go to market. And partners really wanted to be noticed. And at that time, the marketplaces weren't that large. You might have 40 to 50 listings, so it wasn't overly crowded. And then you fast forward a couple of years and you'll see like the Amazon ecosystem has grown to thousands upon thousands of listings from many, many different partners. It becomes a little bit harder to wade through. And that's when a huge investment in marketplaces became an absolute must. So things for discovery, for rating, for not only forward transactions, but actually to be able to back out transactions, to be able to include resellers, to make it easier to have multiple different payment options. And I think the purveyors of these marketplaces very quickly realized that basically the marketplace commerce engine could also become a center of gravity for the customer's procurement path, and more specifically, the customer wallet. So they've been able to effectively capitalize on this investment to gain a larger and larger share of the customer wallet. So not only is it for discovery, but it's also for that convenience of a procurement transaction and all the investment that goes into the automated process flows, the reporting, the remuneration. What I've seen just anecdotally watching some of our partners, especially in the hyperscalers, is they have seen the commerce routes grow several 100% in a very narrow time frame. A couple of them probably saw double and triple digit growth year over year, and now it's become a material part of their overall business. It's no longer experimental software we put up there. It's actually a very important procurement system, and you'll see a lot more companies coming into the fold and trying to plug into that architecture and trying to figure out, well, what can we do to make this easier for our customers? What's the white space that's being left by the hyperscalers that creates an opportunity for third-party companies like Lazard to come in and say, this market need is not being met currently by the large OEMs and the large CSPs. We can do that as a convenience for the customer.
So you talked a little bit about the hyperscalers, and you touched upon how they are improving the ecosystem. Hyperscalers have actually made it possible for the sales team to find a new GTM channel with the cloud GTM and cloud marketplaces. We talk to like sales leaders, partnership leaders on a day-to-day basis as a part of Lazard, and we still see so much of it is still not known by the industry, right? How can the hyperscalers, the GCPs, the Azures, and the AWSs of the world make the whole experience better so that it is better for the ecosystem overall? What are your thoughts there?
It's actually a great question. I think one that highlights the fact that this is really a marathon, right? And we are nowhere near the finish line. For comparison, I think we're probably at the 5-mile mark of a 26-mile race, and we have a long way to go. That's good news. That's good news for companies that find purpose along the way to help customers be more successful. And as I mentioned, fill in that white space that exists between the CSPs, between the capabilities customers really need and partners really need versus what's there. So I would say right now, what you're seeing is everything is pretty much manual. The listing process is manual, your integration, your testing is manual, reporting is manual, even the remuneration process with accounting and billing and is manual and sometimes even painful. There's a lot of room and opportunity to improve that overall process, because as you start cranking up the volume, this is going to become more painful than it has ever been. And we can't just throw people at the problem. We did mention that the value of third-party integrations, I think, is going to be a lot more clear. Before, when partners would start with a particular CSP, they would assume that everything you need is provided by the CSP, and quickly came to realize that is actually not the truth. So I think the demand for these integration services, demand for third-party platforms, demand for ISVs that provide an overlay or a missing capability is really going to grow. Integrations with some of the keystone technologies like your CRM systems such as Salesforce, or your backend ERPs such as Oracle, Zuora, SAP, Infor, Freshworks are going to become more in demand, because now you have to connect and thread these basically sources of truth with your transaction system and your marketplace systems. I also see need for integration with comp systems. So I want to know who's going to get paid on what deal. So tools like Exactly or Anaplan, Verisend, Performio, Captivate IQ, they will probably begin to have a lot more capabilities that connect in to these third-party services as well as the CSPs. For the cloud providers, I think there's two parts. One is they're innovating at a very rapid clip, and sometimes they move fast and break things. And believe it or not, moving fast and breaking things, we should try to do one but not the other, because the breaking changes that are not backwards compatible cause an enormous amount of pain for partners that have to now rejigger their policies or do a lot more additional integrations and technical changes just to be able to catch up with the APIs that were changed or the breaking changes. So this affects everything. It even affects the people and the processes that you have. And I think this is where partners such as Lazard can kind of help along the journey, because you anticipate, these are coming, and you can bake those changes and automate a lot of that misery and mitigate that misery to something that's manageable. I also think that throwing people at the problem has been kind of the default. And so let's acknowledge those unsung heroes. Behind the glamour of the amazing things we can do with marketplaces are amazing people within our sales ops organization, deal desk, accounting, and billing, and a lot of them have been doing much of the work manually. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to help them with the tools that they need to be successful. From a utility perspective, I think marketplaces and any route doesn't have an equivalency with a direct selling route is still considered a burden or a tax from the sales rep's perspective. So if I sell through marketplace and I get charged a fee for doing that, in most cases, that fee is taken out of the contract for that specific order, as opposed to it being a central COGS bucket where we just move all of our costs there. We'll happily pay it across the sales organization, but burdening individual deals actually creates this effective tax disincentive to work with partners, to work through the channel, to work through a marketplace. So I think that's an amazing area of opportunity. And certainly the CSPs could probably afford to bring that fee down to almost nothing, but they themselves have to spend money to invest in that capability. So I think right where it is right now, which is roughly 3% across the board, is actually about as low as you can expect it to get unless you're doing massive, massive volumes. And then finally, the last part I think is really think of your partnership and think of your listing and your marketplace commerce transactions the same way that you would treat product lifecycle management, right? So everything from ideation to compilation to publishing to updating the commerce rules, the price, the index, the discounts. I think there's a demand for more automation here that makes it easier to manage the overall lifecycle of the order, of the process of the marketplace. So like I said, we're just at the 5-mile mark. We have so much more to go. There's so many more great things we can do and hopefully can expect from not only the CSPs, but also our partners in the ecosystem that are helping the CSPs be more successful.
Absolutely, Nima. And I just wanted to reiterate something that you said, like the fee structure that you just talked about, which is basically come down to 3% across all three. It's now competitive with Stripe. So like when we talk to prospects, when we talk to a lot of these customers who are considering this channel, previously there was this hesitancy of not considering the marketplaces because of the higher fees, but that hesitancy is now gone, and we are seeing a huge uptick in terms of interest as well. So like that's a fantastic point that you just called out.
Yeah. And so, for example, I can envision a conversation with the CRO and the CFO going something like, historically we used to pay 20, 15, 10, whatever percent. And that was material enough that you had to bake it into the order calculus because the route mattered where the order came from. But if your marketplace fees are 3%, that's probably in line with the overhead that you already have going direct. So it becomes kind of a non-issue. Removing it out of the order calculus and that order arithmetic is important because it sets marketplaces at an even footing of going direct. And so you have an easier time, conversing with your sales organization and partnering with them as a true partner and giving them more options as opposed to this being considered more of a route change. It's not a route change. It's you're expanding the total surface area of how you can connect with customers and how you can accelerate the overall transaction velocity. And I think once the sales reps understand this and once the CFO understands this, then you could effectively reorganize how you account for some of these fees and move them kind of out of the way, out of the order process flow, and make it more of a, well, this is your cost of goods sold. Fine, we'll put it over here in the corner, but it doesn't immediately, either bias or affect the choice the customer has as to whether they want to buy with a credit card or they want to buy with cash. For them, it's the same, it's the same cost. Equivalently for the sellers, it should be identical.
Fantastic. Nima, so now that we've talked about the sales teams and the comp neutrality and how the finance teams can actually, move this cost in COGS. Now, we are seeing businesses increasingly adopting cloud marketplaces. If you look at the numbers over the years, like the space is growing really, really fast. Something that I experienced, something that you experienced. Me being on the engineering side, I still got the opportunity to experience that workflow, which I'm very fortunate to have witnessed. How should businesses align the sales teams to cement their growth? Like this comes from my personal experience of working with various organizations that I've either worked at or now we are selling into. But there's, I always see this like, hey, we want marketplaces, but we have a sales team. They're not really sure how to operate this channel. So like, what have you seen what have you seen work that can be useful for our viewers?
Yeah, and it's really funny you bring this up, because this is one where I fundamentally believe this is an organization issue. This just kind of falls under the umbrella of Conway's law of, if you don't have the right organizational structure, don't expect your systems to follow suit. Org structure really drives your technology decisions. So this really starts with your sales leadership, and it depends on the kind of CRO or chief revenue officer or VP of sales that you have. If they have a history of being in the direct selling world, and they don't understand carve outs, and they don't understand the value of partners, I think it's going to be a much more challenging discussion to have. And you really need to have a partner friendly CRO to make this work. If you have a CRO who understands that you're not competing with partners, partners actually enable you to access routes to market that are not available to you in countries and verticals, with buyers that you may not have access to, then it becomes part of your overall selling calculus. And the way you know this is, I think, twofold. One is, do your partners have an insertion point in your overall sales methodology? So regardless of what sales methodology you use, I'll use MEDPIC as an example, right? The current MEDPIC outline is only one P for process. It doesn't have a second P for partners. In companies that I've worked with in the past, if the sales methodology had an insertion point for partners, it was much more likely that the sellers would know how to engage partners, how to use partners correctly, and then effectively how to pair and partner with them. So that's the first part. The second part is really on the way that you do compensation and the deal mechanics, and more specifically below the deal mechanics it's the discount structure on the deal. So this is one where you kind of have to acknowledge, listen, not all partners are created the same. A cloud marketplace is not a reseller route. It's not like a traditional channel route. It's really more for procurement efficiency and go to market. But the mechanism itself, the marketplace, doesn't necessarily generate opportunities the way that a channel account manager or channel partner or a reseller would, right? So you can't treat them as equivalents. With that said, I think if you don't remove the cost of doing business with partners, that route will always be colored with the tax, the burden, giving up points on the deal to the partner. And then the conversation degenerates into, well, what have partners done for me lately, as opposed to how much more can I do because a partner is involved in that deal. And if you can flip the script a bit, I think you'll find a tremendous amount of success, and you'll be able to capitalize on having this indirect selling channel on top of your direct sellers. One way this could, from a business perspective, that it could land is a previously 100% direct selling organization could find a balance and say, you know what, we have the top of the pyramid, which is our top 500,000 accounts, which are all enterprise. We want to have a very connected relationship with them. So those will all be direct accounts. And then you have this dedicated direct sales force. But the rest of our target market, whether it's in SMB and mid-market, we will actually kind of preface it as channel preferred or marketplace preferred. And that allows you to have a healthy balance within your sales organizations. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. Now, the route to your, let's say, top 500 customers is pretty straightforward. You can do that with a direct sales force. But the next 10, 20, 50, 100,000 customers, you couldn't possibly reach all of them with only 100 sellers. So you're going to have to figure a way how to be hyper efficient with your access. And that's really where partners come into play. And I think sometimes in the conversations of talking about technology or route neutrality or channel neutrality, we kind of forget the fact that if you add up all the channel partners in the world, there's probably somewhere between 2 and 3 million sellers out there that could be your indirect channel if you know how to activate, engage, and enable them, and equivalently incent them. So that's why I talk about this really being an org issue, is you have to have a CRO who puts their foot forward and says, you know what? We are going to be a partner preferred, a partner first, a partner led, or a partner involved organization. And this is how we're going to do it. And the message that we give our partners is exactly the same message as we give our sales reps. Once that's done, the automation can begin. And now you'll see a lot of opportunities for us to work with the CRM systems and ERP systems to be able to help not only bring leads from top of funnel and be able to segment them really quickly and appropriately, but then go through the order management, the quoting, the private offer process, whatever mechanism you have from a quoting to a quote approval process that you want to put in there. And that's where I think the automation that a lot of the kind of the ISVs in the market can help with, is because once you crank it up, the volume of traffic you're going to get is simply not supportable through a standard sales ops and sales organization. So that, again, another opportunity where partners can help you, 10x your success if you work within the construct of what they can do for you.
Yeah, and again, like there's so many things in that piece that you just mentioned, Nima. The fact that having a leadership that is aligned, and it starts all the way up at the CRO, right? And we've seen something similar on our side. Like when we work with customers who have this alignment at the top, they go in with an understanding of how to work this channel and why it's going to be beneficial, and everyone inside is just aligned, and the process is much more smoother. And you do see that impact of that process in the actual revenue generated, right? Like, because then these companies, these organizations, enterprises will go out there and then actually have that desired impact, versus if there is no alignment at the top. We've seen it time and time again, where the partnership team is promising something, but the CRO is not aligned, and the whole thing kind of comes to a screeching halt. Yeah,
And
go ahead.
so to kind of pull on that thread, I'll give you an
Yep.
example. The question you can ask yourself when you go into a company is the route through partners a primary or
Mm,
secondary channel?
mm,
Is the alliances and channel organization treated as the stepchild to sales? Are you deferential to them? Are you a secondary organization? Or are you peering and at the same level? And that's a really important question to ask. Sure, it's an uncomfortable question, but you got to ask it. Once you get the answer, you'll know. Are we an afterthought as a partnering organization, or are we front and center, shoulder to shoulder with our direct selling organization, and we're working hand in hand and always together? I've, from my experience, when you involve partners, the deal sizes and the deal velocity goes up. It doesn't go down. On average, it goes up. The renewals are easier. They're more guaranteed, higher incidence of renewals, higher incidence of expansion. And so there is definitely a role that partners can play, but you have to make that effort from a leadership perspective to say, we're going to go in this direction, and then to enforce that philosophy through the entire organization.
Absolutely. And then Nima, the other thing that you touched upon is this concept of, throwing more bodies at the problem. And I truly believe that sales ops and, the GTM operations teams are the real unsung heroes of the entire GTM operations. And I've seen there's a split thought between, hey, we should have AEs do the entire thing, right? From creating opportunity, from submitting it to the portals, various portals, like managing that, all of that. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, no, we should all centralize this in a central sales ops function and have that be managed. What have you seen work, and which camp are you on? I'm just curious.
So this is a great question. I think what ends up happening is when you were in the early days of, let's say, standing up a marketplace and starting to do your offers and private offers, it'll generally be managed by the partner sales manager or partner account manager who's responsible for that CSP. Which is okay to start with. But for compliance reasons, for audit reasons,
Mm,
you want to tightly control who is authorized to generate quotes and to send private offers and send an offer quote and accept the quote um, to and from a customer. And the reason for that is it becomes very difficult to track, especially when you become a public company, what's been said. You don't want to go through the process of realizing, oh, I've had these sidebar agreements that I forgot to talk about, because that is a material impact to your quarterly earnings call. And you have to be upfront about it. When you don't do that, that's when you get into trouble. So for compliance and data hygiene and order hygiene, it's really important to put everything in a central place. And usually most organizations have a sales ops group, and more importantly, within the sales ops team, a deal desk. And deal desk is authorized to quote. Deal desk is authorized to send an offer to the customer and receive those back, and then effectively list them in your ERP system. So basically file them. And if you have multiple organizations that do that, you'll have overlapping. And you'll see things like multiple different offers being sent to customers. That causes confusion. The wrong offer being accepted and the customer becoming dissatisfied because they thought they got a better deal and that's the one they wanted. And now you're stuck, in a kind of a bad place. So my recommendation is always going to be go with the organization that is used to following procedure and process and will be auditable, because this is going to happen for you. I don't think there is much in the way of a skills gap. Right? Your deal desk already understands this process pretty well. Going through a marketplace is just another option. It's just another route. It is not a completely different way of operating. And the good thing about having everything do deal desk is, even if they remunerate everything based on paper spreadsheets, they're still the source of truth when it comes to what did we sell, what did we invoice, how much of that invoice did we get paid, and what's our actual bookable and billable revenues that I can give to the CFO and then we can report on. It's up to them and the accounting team to be able to effectively correlate all these data points. It should not be the responsibility of anyone outside of that organization. So the sooner you can get this into sales ops, and sooner that the proper procedures are being followed, I think the easier it'll be for you to scale. Because at that point, if the issue is we're going to go from 100 orders to 1,000 orders, you know exactly where the gaps are within your organization, or the choke points, and you can go and work on them, and you can fix them with people, you can fix them with process, you can fix them with tools and technologies.
Got it. So in a nutshell, seems like what you've seen work in the past, or what you recommend, is like at the start, maybe you do this in an ad hoc fashion, but as you grow and mature, in order for the added compliance and added scalability, maybe centralizing that function under a deal desk or a sales op unit would be more useful. Does that summarize that properly?
Absolutely. As soon as you have moved out of kind of a pre-GA experimental phase, and you want to go into production and make this generally available, it should go into the organization that rightly should own it. And I think in this case, it's 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, the sales ops organization. This shouldn't really belong within alliances. Now, you will manage the relationship. You'll get escalations when things break. That's your job. You got to go fix it. But the day-to-day operation from just a pure marketplace transaction perspective should really be within that centralized organization.
Fantastic. Okay, Nima, so we talked a little bit about the alignment at the leadership level, and we started with the CROs. What I have seen typically is CRO is a very, very important stakeholder, but there's also the head of sales who are extremely important as well. And as we know, one of the very important aspect of being a sales leader is the compensation of all of their sellers. Now, when it comes to the sales leaders, how can they ensure collectively that their teams are incentivized properly when it comes to cloud marketplace? And you did talk about the comp neutrality and some of the other aspects. Is there anything more to add in that section?
Yeah. So for the uninitiated, if you've never been in a sales organization or sales op and sales leadership, two of the most important things sales leaders do on an annual basis is set the goals, and you do that with the board and the executive staff, and then design the compensation system commensurate with the goals that you have. And it's perfectly reasonable for comp systems and comp structures to change year over year. The market is changing, the priorities are changing. That's completely normal. You're bringing in new products, new services, new SKUs, as well as new routes. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to have changing comp structures year over year. With that said, what trips a lot of people up is once they've designed them, they're now immutable. You're in a contract year, you can't change the comp structure in the middle of the year. It's just going to cause a lot of tension. So what you want to do is get it as close to right as you possibly can. And for the sales leadership and the finance leadership, the most important thing with respect to marketplaces is to acknowledge if there are route costs. And this will generally be called things like route neutrality, channel neutrality, comp neutrality, or attainment neutrality. They're different ideas, but generally what it comes down to is if I sell something for $100 and I have to give $20 to my partner as a finder's fee or as a discount structure, then technically I'm only getting $80 back. Now, does my sales rep get the $100 worth of credit or the $80 worth of credit? And there's two different camps, and it really depends on how you set up your comp system. But be aware that if your sales rep doesn't get full attainment or comp neutrality, that will drive a certain behavior. So if they only get 80 cents on the dollar, they're more likely to bias against going through partners unless it's absolutely necessary. And that's what I think it's the most important conversation that the sales leadership has to have after you've done your goal setting. No one's going to be, giving feedback on the goals. The goal is the goal. That's where the business has to go. The question is, how do you get there? Do you enlist only your sellers, or do you enlist also the amazing ecosystem of partners that you can have, kind of the army of other sellers that you can bring into the game? And then this is really where you need a finance officer, a CFO, partner to help you figure out how can you remove these burdens and taxes within your routes to market without it adversely affecting the overall budget process. And there's always going to be a give and take. There's never an absolutely clean way of doing this. And that's why I think the CFO and the CRO really have to work hand in hand to make this work well.
And I think my mind goes back to the thing that you said, like so far in MedPick, there's only one P, but like really having that another P for partners right at that process is critical for the success of the sales organization.
Yeah. So I'll give you another practical example. Let's say you follow a MedPick process. Let's say you create a command plan. Let's say you just log your leads into Salesforce. You can put custom fields in Salesforce. And one of the custom fields that I think you should put in there is the first question after you have asked the customer what their needs are is if they have any current spend commits on any cloud partners or any large resellers. That's really important to have. In most cases in a sales process, it's an afterthought. No one even thinks to ask that question until a quote has been generated and it's been sent to order management. I think that's the first thing you should ask, because then you know which partner to bring in and have them working with you hand in hand, because they may have access to a more powerful economic buyer, a better technical champion, C-suite access. They may have access to commits that are as of yet not burned down or not spent yet, that will really and materially help you move that deal faster for a larger amount. And so, training the entire sales organization to effectively ask partner first, partner leading questions, I think it's going to be really important for any organization that recognizes the value of marketplaces and cloud and partners and has adjusted the way that they operate to bias towards get as much information as you possibly can. Even if you choose not to go with a partner, at least ask the question and have that information in hand so you can make a more informed decision.
Completely agree. All right, Nima, moving to a little bit more tactical side of the discussion, we talked about private offers, and you talked about how the introduction of the concept of private offers created this motion that was not only aligned towards SMB, but also for enterprise customers to be able to have custom contracts, right? Now, they have become a norm in this entire cloud GTM space. What do you think will be the next best thing for the GTM teams to release a quote offer on marketplaces? Like, where do we stand today? Where do you think we are headed? And what's the ideal? Like, if you can walk us through that journey, that'll be fantastic.
Absolutely, and I think we kind of touched a little bit on it in kind of prior into the podcast. But I think fundamentally the main issue is that there is an economic and a technical disconnect.
Mhm.
And that's one where the marketplaces and the partners have a tremendous surface area to provide a lot of value that just doesn't exist, right? So initially we talked about how the order of operations was always to end up with an open offer system. So it's discovery, it's deployment, and then it's an open offer, transact with a credit card. I never talk to a person. I just click on a website and I'm done. But in the enterprise, it's a private offer process. So there's a lot of negotiation that happens outside of the marketplace route to get to an agreed amount quantity and dollar. And then that gets put into the private offer transaction system. So I think one, it's recognized that there has been this divergence. And maybe right now what we need to do is actually invest a little bit more in the private offer process. And then in the future, the open offer process with things like the AWS SaaS factory capabilities, integrated billing, integrated licensing, which is all great and everyone needs to have it, not quite as valuable as making private offers work really well right now. Also, remember, open offers are very difficult to implement. You have to get an engineering team to build that effectively for you and then maintain it going forward. That's hard to do. It's expensive. Whereas private offers, I can just log into the AWS ACE portal, create a private offer, and I'm done. That's a 5-minute process, not that hard. So the private offers have actually become the easy route. But for the enterprise customers who don't buy off the shelf, this is still not a regimented, easily identifiable first order principle for them. So I think where we are right now is putting the investment in making the private offer process a lot easier. Right. So every cloud does it differently. The reporting is done differently. The remuneration is done differently. It's hard to track. Classic example is, let's say I have an agreement with a hyperscaler and they have a net 30 payback period. So when they get the money, they'll pay me within 30 days. But for every offer that goes through that private offer marketplace, I have no idea what the end customer's net payment terms are with my CSP. It could be 15 days, it could be 90 days. I have no idea when I'm going to get that money. Right? Classic example. Another one is, I have no idea if that customer has any headroom left on their EDP, and no guarantee that it's obvious that this will count on a burn down. If I'm selling software, I may not be able to guarantee that software can be deployed on the hyperscaler. And that's one of the rules that they've started to enforce. If you go through marketplace, then this software has to be deployed on my infrastructure. Otherwise, why would Amazon sell software that's going to go run on Microsoft? And then the other is really around what's the preference that the customer has. Do they have a footprint on Amazon or Google or Microsoft or Oracle or somewhere else? How do I get access to that information? I think this customer intelligence will really help shape the narrative of how quickly we can be able to identify the customer's needs, help them steer into the right direction, the right route, and then get them what they need, the way they need it, the way they want to buy. So these are just a couple of different examples where I think there's a lot of opportunity to actually scope out better integration with other information systems that will allow you to draw more intelligence into it. And in the time of generative AI, I think what we're really saying is there are disparate information sources that don't necessarily correlate together. Great opportunity for us to be able to, input data from a much larger variety of sources, much larger quantity of data, and be able to filter through this really quickly to get at least either an absolute answer, yes or no, or a bias answer, like a percentage that's more, 80% probability that this particular customer would have a preference to buy through Amazon compared to the other CSPs. That's incredible intelligence that is really useful to the sales organization. Just think of like the best restaurant you have ever dined at. Think of how much more attention they pay to you as a patron, as a customer, and how much better your overall experience was. That concierge level of service is capable through information and what the third-party ISV partners can do for the marketplace and the customer and the ISV selling through the marketplace.
Fantastic. Yeah, and Nima, I could talk to you about private offers for an hour. There's so much to unpack there, but I do want to be mindful of time. There are a couple things that I really want to pick your brain on. And first one out of that is, a successful run on the cloud marketplaces, like the entire cloud GTM space, requires a single source of truth. And how do you see the ecosystem moving towards that? Like, as enterprises go, as companies grow, like we use hundreds of SaaS tools ourselves. We use so many other systems of records. How can we move to a place where the cloud GTM is an integral part of a system where the single source of truth is maintained? And what are your thoughts there?
Um, this is actually, I think, one of the biggest unsolved problems that's facing the industry today. So let's give a real world example, right? I'm Acme Anvil Company. I do my quoting process in Zuora because I'm a startup and Zuora is easy to use and cost effective. But I do my order management and SKU listing in Salesforce. So all of the opportunities are listed in Salesforce, the customers in Salesforce, and therefore the order is in Salesforce, even though the quoting is done in Zuora. When I transact, I submit the offer through, let's say, the Amazon ACE portal. So now I have a third party that has a different source of truth, which has an offer price and an invoice balance with a discount, and then something that's remunerated back. And then once I get the invoice report back and some sort of payment back from AWS, I log that into my revenue management system, which might be SAP. So now I have 4 different systems that don't talk to each other, and I've got humans in the loop trying to kind of copy and paste from this system to that system. When you add in the 5 other companies that do coding, order management, revenue, offer marketplace, the permutations and combinations are just out of control. So I think this is a huge unsolved problem, which as of today, we're throwing people at, but in the future has a tremendous opportunity to solve via technology, via a platform that can really connect all of these together and help us with correlating these different sources of truth. And I've been through enough examples where you get a report from one system and a report from a different system. You look at them, they don't match. And now you have to sit through the painful process of a line by line remuneration, trying to figure out what in the world happened here.
Such a good point, Nima. Like I was talking to some a security company just recently, and they're very paranoid about all of this, especially their finance department. So they have inserted a manual process in between accepting a private offer and closing the quote on their CRM, where every single deal goes through a manual review of what's been promised, what's been mentioned in the private offer, to whether it matches on the CRM or not. Like we shouldn't be using humans for any work like this. But this is such a good point that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the areas where it's a tough and challenging problem to solve. I think that the vendors themselves are aware of it, but the solution may not necessarily involve the large vendors. I don't think it'll necessarily involve, like the Zuoras, the Salesforce, the SAPs of the world, or even the marketplace vendors. It may come from a third party, and they may see how to glue these things all together and be that hygienic third party that can do it.
All right, Nima, we have a final question from us here. Given your experience in this space, for how long have you been here? How long have you seen how marketplaces is evolving? Where do you see the ecosystem going, and where do you see marketplaces playing that role? Tell us, use your crystal ball and tell us, what the future entails.
So I think first and foremost, in the next 5 years, if your sellers are not don't understand how to sell with the cloud partners through cloud marketplaces, they will be at a significant disadvantage. And so that's number one. I think that's like everyone has to learn cloud marketplaces and working with your cloud partners and how to be cloud native. The second is you will see a lot more investment coming from the CSPs themselves in making their platforms a lot more attractive. And that'll take the shape of the tools and the technology that they use will get much, much better. There'll be many more features within the ACE portal, within the marketplace, that will be tremendously useful. They will also then put a lot more programs around making it attractive to go through these. And these programs might just be go-to-market programs. It might be incentive programs. It might be SPIFs, maybe any number of things. And then they'll tie this all together with an overall go-to-market where they will have a way to combine, let's say, an SI partner with a reseller, with an ISV, all transactable through the marketplace. And, companies like Amazon already have this in the case of CPPO and their DSOR offering. And I think Microsoft has, I think theirs is called MPO or MPPO. And then the third area are kind of an acknowledgement and investment in fixing some of the main points that we've raised. And I think there's probably 4 areas that it would be great to have some of these problems fixed. The first one we kind of talked about is the source of truth. What is and should be the source of truth? How can we have different data systems talk to each other and always sync correctly? The second is the order management process is still very much a multi-state, multi-step, phase-gated model with a lot of manual intervention. So if you're selling in a model where your customer has to talk to a sales rep, they might have to have 36 different touch points. And that includes the quoting process, the approval process, the private offer, the acceptance, the marketplace, the invoicing, the billing, the remuneration. There's a lot of space where things can go wrong, a lot of steps where things can break. And bridging that gap and automating that gap is going to be very, very important. So that's on the order management side. The third is really on the remunerations. This is just, we talked about a lot of unsung heroes in sales ops and accounting and billing. Well, there's a reason we have unsung heroes. We've put a tremendous burden on this team to be able to manage the whole offer acceptance, invoicing, customer payment, CSP remuneration, reporting, accounting, reconciliation. It's manual, it's painful, there's a lot of opportunities to make mistakes. I think fixing this is going to be really, really important, or at least better information, better reporting, automation. And then the last is really going to be around renewals. You're 8 times more likely to win a renewal than you are to win a new customer, a new logo. And no matter how important it is for a company to have new logos, if you ignore the renewals process, you're basically walking away from an existing customer. So automating that, making that a lot easier. There's just so much we can do, so many simple things to make the overall renewals process a non-issue. And renewals, in this scenario, I actually think of renewals and expansion as being under the same umbrella. It's growing the account, absolutely, but making sure that your customer stays. And the best companies in the world have a 93% renewal rate. On the opposite side of the spectrum, I hate to say it's probably closer to 0. So what can you do outside of making a better product to make the overall renewals, accounting, and sales process better? So just a couple of ideas, but I think there's definitely a lot of low-hanging fruit available right now that could have a material impact on customers and partners and OEMs and ISVs alike.
Fantastic. Nima, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. It was a lot useful for me. I'm sure it's going to be useful for all of our audiences as well. So thank you so much for coming with us today.
It's been my genuine pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on the call.